You got your Mac guys, Jody McDonald and John McMullen here on Birds 365. We are joined by a mobile all-time NFL writer, author, and Hall of Fame selector. He's going to have to do some work the end of this week. Our buddy Jason Cole jumps aboard with us here on Birds 365. How are you, bud?
I'm good. We already did the work. So they changed the meeting now. So we do it like a couple of weeks beforehand so that they can do the whole production for Thursday. So
gotcha.
Shoot, I should have known that.
The announcement is on Thursday because they moved the honors show and that.
So you're gonna cheat and give us all the results ahead of time here on Birds 365, huh?
Yeah, sure.
Now, how much? I assume they don't let. Did they let you guys in on who's in, or do you get a feel for it? Do you know right now? Could you spoil it, even if you wanted to?
Yeah, I could spoil it.
All right.
Yeah,
is that a feel thing, or you have the actual? Because you know the.
Well, I know what the I know what the final five is.
Yeah,
and unless we didn't vote one of those guys in.
Yeah,
I can tell you who the
Gotcha.
I can tell you who the final five is, and then you can kind of say we haven't turned anybody down in 20 years.
Yeah, I was going to say, when was the last time somebody made the final five and didn't make the vote?
I think it was 2000. I looked this up the other day because it was important to an argument I was making over a particular player, and I think it's 2004. The year that I think the last time was the year that Dan Marino and Steve Young were the only new era candidates that went in. And they went in the same year. Benny Friedman and Fritz Pollard went in that year as senior candidates or old time candidates, whatever you want to call that. And then Young and Marino made it as the only two guys. And so that was basically a two-man class. And then the two other guys made it. Friedman and Pollard made it as special selections, whatever you want to call that category. So it's been 19 years since we pulled any shenanigans like
that. Jason, here in Philadelphia, obviously, there's bigger news than the Hall of Fame. But one Hall of Fame thing I always get a kick out of. You'll hear Eagles fans say, "Oh, if Howie Roseman wins another Super Bowl, he's in the Hall of Fame." Explain to people just how difficult it is for an executive to get in the Hall of Fame and just how few are in the Hall of Fame.
Well, no, I think there's a couple levels. I'm not saying Howie won't ever make it, but just because he's won 3 Super Bowls, like Ernie, of course, he's not in.
Yeah.
And Ernie, of course, he drafted Elway and Eli Manning, right? Like as number 1 overall picks, and those guys went on to win 2 Super Bowls each, right? Like Ernie, of course, he's the only guy to pick multiple quarterbacks who won Super Bowls, right? Like that. So if Ernie, of course, he doesn't really have a great case, like how does Howie just automatically jump him based on winning 2 or 3 Super Bowls? I mean, it's nice, and maybe it'll work, but I don't know that that's exactly what it's going to be. Look, the executive case is we bring up 1 or 2 contributor candidates, right? Guys who did their work off the field. Now we created the Hall. I shouldn't say we. The Hall created a special category for contributors, so that coaches and executives like Howie had an easier path to get in. They used to have to compete with players and other modern era finalists. And when you put players up against executives, it's really, really hard.
Yeah.
So, but there's owners and coaches in that category, and we have a pretty long list of guys who have good arguments to get in. Whether that's Mike Shanahan or whether that's Mike Holmgren. Like there are a number of coaching candidates, executive candidates who deserve their day to be argued over. This year we argued over Don Coryell, who'd been in the room like 4 or 5 other times before this.
I was going to ask you. You gave us the percentages of the cut down to the final 5. It's been a decade plus since you guys didn't take all 5. How about in the contributor category? You cut down to 3 ahead of time, and they're up for voting when you guys did your work previously this past week. What's the usual percentage on those? Is it like it's been for the regulars that you're damn close to 100%? Is it more like
It's damn close to
depending on how
100%.
many there are?
That's damn close to 100%. The senior candidates, the guys who were passed over the first time. So like this year, Chuck Howley was one of those guys. I'm trying to remember who.
Joe Klecko.
Joe Klecko.
Joe Klecko's in that group. There was a third guy. I'm trying to remember who it was. But
Coryell.
No. Coryell's a contributor. Then there's senior guys. Like
Kenny Riley.
Yeah, and Ken Riley. So Ken Riley, Chuck Howley, Joe Klecko.
And Joe Klecko.
And then there's Coryell as a contributor, right? So there's these basically the 3 categories: the modern era guys that we sort of focus on, the senior guys, and then the contributors. And so if you lump the contributors and the senior guys together, it's pretty close to 100%. It's hard to vote against those guys. Just from a sort of a human decency standard, like I'm not a big fan of the senior process. I think this is where I buy into what Deion Sanders says, is that we're putting too many guys in the Hall of Fame. But at the same time, if you're going to bring one of these guys to me, you're going to raise their hopes that they finally have a shot to make it, or raise the hope of their families that they finally have this one last shot to make it. I better have a really good argument to not put them in, right? Like they better be truly, truly mediocre, and there was a reason that they were passed over. But I mean, so it becomes kind of a sympathy vote.
All right, let me take it back.
Let me just answer one last thing about the only contributor that I know that didn't make it in this process when we did it this way was Paul Tagliabue, who I did vote against. And then subsequently he made it when they sort of changed the rules, and they brought about this larger class that they put in 2 years ago. But yeah, he's the one guy who had problems getting in through that process.
And shame on me, I should know this, but I don't, so please clarify for me. The senior group of 3 that you have this year, how do you get to that number? What's the voting process to get it to? Is it 3 as a given number? Do they need a percentage to can it be just 1? Can it be 8? How do you get to the group of the veterans that are up for consideration each year?
It used to alternate. Basically, our rules are built on a waterbed. So they kind of fluctuate depending on who's what they want to do, and ultimately it's up to the Hall of Fame what they want to do, right? So what we had been doing for about 3 or 4 years, I think, was we had 2 of these contributors, and it would be 2 and 1, 2 contributors, 1 senior, or 2 seniors and 1 contributor. This year, because there's such a group of voters who are pushing for senior candidates, and the senior committee is so backlogged with guys that they feel are qualified players, and I defer to certain respects, which is why I vote for these guys. But we have a subcommittee of voters who are called the senior committee. They subsequently pushed for adding another candidate, so we added a 3rd candidate this year.
Gotcha.
Sort of to my chagrin, but again, that's only my opinion. Other people feel differently about the process.
All right, Jason, one more. I'm getting in a wormhole here, but I'm interested. You mentioned Paul
Tagliabue. You've gone
yeah,
straight.
I'm going in the wormhole. We got a game to talk about. I promise to get to that. But you mentioned Tagliabue because it was, difficult for him to get in. You voted against him, you mentioned. Roger Goodell moving forward. What kind of lightning rod is that? What kind of lightning rod is he going to be? You're nothing, because there's so many controversies. It's not his fault, but he gets blamed for it. He's the lightning rod for the owners. You don't think there's going to be any pushback when it's his turn?
Not a lot from me.
No.
Look, he's done a lot of things that people would second guess. I'd say he also lives in an era where there's more attention paid to the NFL than ever before.
Yes.
So the off-field issues, like Burt Bell, the famous Philadelphian, he didn't have to deal with the media paying attention to off-field problems.
No.
Right? It just didn't exist. Like, they didn't care back then. And the audience was smaller, and the audience was also a more rough and tumble audience who, didn't care. They didn't care about stuff like that happened away from the field, right? So, Burt Bell's in, right? Same thing with Pete Rozelle. Pete Rozelle didn't have to deal. I mean, if you had to judge Pete Rozelle's candidacy for the Hall of Fame based on the violent nature of the NFL in the 1960s and 1970s, he never gets in, right? Like, some of the stuff that used to happen. So, Rodgers is sort of a victim of the attention that the NFL has created. Some of it created by him, some of it created by people like Jerry Jones and, the growth of the game and all those kinds of things. I'll just say this, from an economic standpoint, Roger Goodell has headed up the greatest era of economic growth in the history of the league, right? The popularity of the game, he's headed it up during that. My problem with Tagliabue had to do with, cover up of concussion information that led them to a wormhole where they got sued. He's not responsible for that, even though he had to testify. That stuff was done during Tagliabue's era. And the false studies that they did, and the crock medicine, and the crock doctors that they had.
The podiatrist running the concussion program.
He was a rheumatologist.
All right.
Yeah, like that kind of stuff. That was under Tagliabue's watch, and it was a cover up along the lines of the cigarette industry, right, the tobacco industry. Rodgers not responsible for that. He had to deal with it, but he's not responsible for it. And I'm not saying that Roger is the nicest guy in the world. That's not his job. Okay. But I would say this, the growth of the NFL, the success of the NFL during his time, he deserves his share of credit for that. And I would vote for him into the Hall of Fame, despite, a lot of, bruises. My problem with Tagliabue is part of your job is to care for the men who play. And he did not do that properly, in my view.
Jason Cole here with us on Birds 365. All right, let's turn our attentions to that game they're going to play on Sunday. John and I have been talking about this basically since the season when the Eagles were 2-0 and 4-0 and 6-0. Too many people go, yeah, but they haven't played anybody. Will at least after this game, the Eagles get some credit for having played somebody, or will there be some other explanation if they went, well, yeah, but Mahomes had a bum ankle.
It's the easiest path ever to winning a Super Bowl. No team is, this is like playing on an elementary school playground. This is scary. That was so simple. Like any team could have won a title with Philadelphia's schedule. They accomplished absolutely nothing this entire season. I hope your fans don't take me seriously. So, look, it's winning NFL football games is not an easy thing to do, right? Like, it doesn't matter what the schedule looks like or it doesn't look like, and to largely dominate over that stretch with the most consistent level of play in the entire league. And if you don't, look, we can look at all the stats and the records and measures of how a season goes and who you play and all those kinds of things. But if you don't just watch the Eagles and sit there and go, that's a really complete football team and a superbly talented one that has very few holes. All right. If you don't come to that conclusion after watching them play a couple of games, you don't know what you're looking at. Okay, it's that simple. All right, they're really, really good. Are they one of the greatest 5 teams or 10 teams in the history of the Super? I have no idea. I'll say this: their per play dominance over the course of the season, like how many yards they average every play that they run versus how many they give up by their defense, is dominating stuff. All right, and it's they haven't sat here and won a bunch of games, nail biter games. They've dominated most games, right? Which is a mark of a really, really great football team. Okay. Now, having said that, do I look at Jalen Hurts and go, "Oh, this is a transcendent talent who's going to dominate the NFL for the next 10 years"? No, I think he's having a really good run, and we'll see how it plays out. And with a guy like that, you always ask the question, what happens when he can't run anymore? Is he a pure pocket passer? And I have my doubts about that. But for right now, Jalen Hurts is playing at a level that deserves MVP consideration. That defensive line is extraordinary. Will it last? No, probably not, because they got Graham and Cox are, a billion years old, and Ndamukong Suh's been around forever. There's going to be change, but for right now, they're taking advantage of the opportunity they have. They're playing incredible football. They've been very healthy, with the exception of Hurts, lately, and that makes me wonder how the game is going to play out. But they've had an extraordinary season, and I give them all the credit in the world, and I give Sirianni a lot of credit for making it work. I mean, again, you look at that offense, it's not the most complicated offense in the world, but it's perfect for what they have.
Yeah. And you mentioned that word transcendent, Jason. There is a transcendent talent on the other side. You're an historian. We're 5 years as a starter with Patrick Mahomes, 5 championship games, 3 Super Bowls. He loses Tyreek Hill. Who, by the way, had a pretty good year in Miami for those paying attention. 5,200 passing yards. Juju Smith-Schuster's his best receiver. 40-plus touchdowns. What are we watching with Patrick Mahomes?
Well, somebody asked me the other day, has he already qualified for the Hall of Fame, through, what is he, 6 years in the league?
Yeah.
Yes. And I would say yes. When you compare his career to Kurt Warner's career. Now, Kurt Warner is an extraordinary story. Guy coming out of nowhere, was bagging groceries, etc., came off the bench and became this dominant player. But the bulk of his career statistically really comes down to about 5 years.
Yeah.
Right.
I didn't think he was Hall of Famer. I say it all the time, but like a shooting star. But I'm a longevity guy. I got to have more longevity, more.
And I understand that. And look, I understand those arguments, and I've been in favor of Dwight Stevenson and Terrell Davis and Tony Baselli. So I believe that certain shooting stars deserve to get in, right? And Kurt Warner was one of those guys. But let's just say the meat of their careers matches up already. So as long as his career doesn't just completely die off, just fall apart, I think, he's already kind of qualified for the Hall of Fame. 3 Super Bowl appearances, 1 championship already, 2 MVP awards, assuming that he's going to win it on Thursday, right? Just watching him as a player, yes, we're looking at a guy who's likely going to make the Hall of Fame. We don't know how the next 5 to 10 years are going to play out. But right now, I would say, that's what we're looking at. He's an extraordinary talent. He is the most physically gifted quarterback I have seen in this league in terms of the combination of running around and arm strength. Let me put it, he's on a level with guys like Aaron Rodgers and John Elway with his ability to throw it from different angles, from different places on the field, from different movement, to make throws that other human beings simply cannot make, and allowing you to redraw the X's and O's of any offense to give you an amazing amount of freedom. Like that's what John Elway could do. Like you could run 40-yard cross-field passes, on 30-yard down and outs where you would bootleg Elway to the left-hand side and throw it back to Steve Watson on the right-hand side, right? Like you could do that with John Elway, where most offensive coordinators can't even draw that play up because most human beings can't do it. You have Elway, you have Aaron Rodgers, you have Mahomes, probably a couple other guys who can do stuff like that.
That's pretty good triumvirate right there. I need your insight on this because John and I talk about this plenty on the show. Understood going into the game, Andy Reid has an advantage over Nick Sirianni via experience. Been there, done that, 4 Super Bowls compared to none. But he's only won one of those Super Bowls, but he has gotten that many teams to that level, and this is Nick's first shot. But John and I are both fans of CEO coaches, guys who are just the head coach of the football team, have a good enough staff that they can have an offensive coordinator call plays. They can have a defensive coordinator call plays. They're just in charge of the team. Andy, God bless him, he's going to the Hall of Fame, but he's never given up play calling. He'll hand it off for a week here, a week there to boost one of his assistants so he can become a head coach. But when push comes to shove, Andy's taking that sheet back in front of his face. Is there a coaching staff advantage in this game, Eagles or Chiefs?
Well, experience is a big thing, right? Like, so I would give Andy that huge advantage on having been there, done that, not being affected by perhaps the momentum swings and the temptations that go with a game because he's been through it. At the same time, younger coaches tend to win this game. I just think, look, if you're asking me who's a better coach, it's Andy Reid.
No, I'm asking you, who's got the better staff?
Better staff. I'm still going to go with the Chiefs. Steve Spagnuolo has drawn up some game plans that beat Tom Brady, right? And shut down Tom Brady in an undefeated season. Shut down the Patriots in that Super Bowl. Now, he had great players on the defensive line, like Justin Tuck and Michael Strahan, with that Giants team that shut down the Patriots and upset them. So I give an advantage to those two guys in this situation over what the Eagles are going to present if you're talking about coaching staff versus coaching staff. Because, Look, Spagnuolo has his hands full in this game. You have to be very disciplined in your approach on how you go after Jalen Hurts to force him to be a passer and to keep him from running. If you saw what the 49ers did in that first 20, 25 minutes, they had Jalen Hurts corralled. Now the game got out of hand. It fell apart, but it fell apart, because, the Devonta Smith play, they're really smart and, it doesn't get overturned on a replay because Devonta Smith gets them up to the line right away, right? Like that's good, smart coaching, right? They've got a signal ready. They've got ready to go. Like, let's hustle the line before they can see that this was not a catch. Josh Johnson, that play where he drops the ball on the snap, that helps create the momentum for, for the Eagles offense, the drive that had the 3 penalties by the 49ers. But if you watched how the game was playing out, that was much closer to being a 0-0 first half than it was to being a bigger lead for Philadelphia, right? Like, I thought that the 49ers defense just did a spectacular job. The game just eventually falls apart because the 49ers can't do anything on offense to make it even remotely competitive. It becomes another dominant victory for the Eagles, and they might have won anyways. Like, I'm not trying to say that they won only because of these things that happened, but the first half was a lot closer in reality as I watched it play out because of the 49ers defense. Now, having said all of that, Kansas City does not have the 49ers talent. And if Philadelphia can run the ball, they can probably do what Tampa Bay did to the Chiefs 2 years ago, in the Super Bowl where they really controlled the entire tempo of the game. My problem with the Philadelphia running attack is I think a lot of it is based off of what you allow Jalen Hurts to get away with early in the game. Do you allow him to get outside? Do you allow him to break some runs that set up, Gainwell and all the other guys, Sanders for their bigger runs? So like there's a little math and X's and O's to this, which gets me back to Spagnuolo. Can he draw up a game plan that is disciplined and effective where the front four of the Chiefs can keep Hurts and force Hurts to be a thrower primarily and keep him from using his legs primarily? And if they can do that, they can keep this game somewhat close in my view. If they can't, then Philly can run away with this game.
Yeah, Jason, you mentioned it a couple times, and you're right. The Eagles' offense is pretty simple. It's an RPO-based offense, and you mentioned that word, math, arithmetic, whatever you want to say. It's about +1 in the running game. Does that make it easier on Steve Spagnuolo or more difficult? Because it's not about necessarily X's and O's. It's about that math. So if you can't, +1 means +1. If you can't account for +1, and remember, you have the best offensive line in the NFL blocking for them, can you scheme up that advantage?
But football, despite all the things that coaches will tell you about how complicated it is sometimes a fairly simple game. And if you have a one-man advantage, like you're talking about, if you can force the defense to have to account for the quarterback as a runner on a regular basis, right? Then yes, you have a very unique advantage. And that's one of the advantages that Philadelphia has. Now, he's a good enough thrower as a complement off of that running, whereas like Lamar Jackson is not a good enough thrower on a consistent basis. Like Jalen Hurts is a better player than Lamar Jackson, in my view. He may not be faster. He may not be a better overall runner. We can have all those kinds of, debates. But as a complete football player, Jalen Hurts is a better player than Lamar Jackson because he will hurt you more consistently in the passing game. And so you take that combination, yes, it's much more of a problem for the defense because, if you try to attack him with a blitzer, he's going to hurt you with his arm. Okay. And they have really good receivers that are going to hurt you with the arm between, Goddard and the two outside guys and Smith and Brown, right? Like one of those guys is going to get to you if you keep bringing extra guys to try and stop Hurts. If you only come with 4 guys, you better be extremely disciplined in your pass rush lanes. And you watch the 49ers. They didn't just take off up the field.
Yeah.
They were doing classic kind of 2-gap stuff where they stayed in their lanes. They didn't do a lot of twists and a lot of stunts. They just came straight up the field and played disciplined lanes and said, look, Jalen, we're going to keep you in this pocket area and force you to be a thrower. And if you can do that, you can keep the game relatively close. But even at that, they got the 31 points, right? Like at the end of the day, they still put a 30 spot on a really good defensive team. Now there are some things that went into it, but they did it, and they still ran the ball pretty effectively. At critical moments of the game, Hurts wasn't part of that, but so yes, the task for Spagnuolo is really, really tough. But if he can draw it up, and he has drawn it up before in games like this, then you're talking about, a game where Kansas City, I think, can win. And that's the scenario under which Kansas City wins, because you can keep it to a game that's played in the, say, mid-20s. And the Chiefs can score, 27 points in this game. Can they get to 35? I've got my doubts about that. But they can score 27. They might be able to get to 30 points in this game, like Dallas did against Philadelphia's defense. They put up some points. The Chiefs can put up some points. They know what they're doing out there.
All right, Jason, last thing, and I need you to help myself and John and all of our Birds 365 audience out a little bit with a little guidance. Although we do call ourselves Birds 365, John and I try and be objective and balanced and fair. Having known you as long as I've known you, I know you're objective, balanced, and fair. Are we going to, at the end of the game, be able to say, and the referee had nothing to do with it? We know we've got the fringe outside guy who are, no matter what, going to go, oh, it's a fix. The ref's going to do a good job in this game, Jace?
How the hell am I supposed to know that?
Come on, you know everything. That's why we have you on.
I'm with you, Jason.
They're
I
going to
can't-
suck as
I
always.
can't stand-
Like,
yeah,
you're
I
right.
can't.
Like, yeah,
They're
I mean,
human beings. They make mistakes. You know what? I'll say this.
Right.
I'll throw this at you.
And wait,
I'm
let me just say this. Let
Yeah.
me just back it up. When I say they're going to suck, I mean they suck because it's so incredibly hard to do.
Yeah.
They are human beings, and this game moves so fast. And to me, it's a joke. Like if you took an everyday Joe guy who's like, the guy who sits in front and goes, they blew that call. There's idiots,
Yeah.
this and that. And go,
Yeah.
okay, we're going to give you a whistle and we're going to put a striped shirt on you. Go down the field and see how you do, pal. Like they wouldn't last 30 seconds in a game. They get ripped apart by the players who are chewing on them, right? Like it's a hard job. And making calls is like half the battle. Controlling the game is just as important as making calls. So having said that, they always suck because everybody thinks that they suck. And that's just how it's going to go. There's going to be some missed call that people are going to go crazy about. With that, I'm sorry, John, go ahead.
And yeah, they over legislate the game. They make it tougher on these guys.
Yeah,
It's but the one part where I think they could improve, and I want to get your quick thoughts on this, is all-star officiating crews. Just keep the crews together. If it's Carl Chepper's crew, you let Carl have his crew. I don't like the movement around to the so-called all-stars, and then they have no chemistry, the group together.
There's something to be said for that. I don't know I don't know if there are some analytics to it. I do buy some of it. Like, look, some refs are just better than others, right? Like, and I don't know how you judge that. Consistency of calls, how they officiate games. I mean, I know they keep records on these guys, and I don't know if the chemistry thing is a real thing or not a real thing when it comes to games like this. It's not like in the NBA where you're reffing 3 games a week, or 4 games a week, right? Where you have to constantly be communicating about the game. You ref once a week, so I don't know how to do those analytics. I think it's a reasonable argument, and it's a reasonable argument to be investigated, whether what you're saying is right or not. But I also hear the one, like, you want your best refs in the best games to eliminate as many potential problems as you possibly can. I hear both sides of that argument. I'm not sure which one's right. And as much as you're going to guffaw at this answer, I trust the league to come up with the best answer that they possibly can at this moment. Like they're looking at it the best way they can. Now, I know everybody's going to guffaw at that answer. Okay, and say, the league screws it up too, because that's what we say. The league always screws it up. But that's just our default answer on everything.
All right. You kind of told us earlier that the Eagles have as talented team as they do, and it could be close, or it could be the Eagles open up a big lead. You want to give us a score, or you want to hold off on that, and everybody can find out, I'm sure, on Twitter at JasonCole62. He'll be putting up a score later in the week. But if you want to give us a score now, we'd be very willing to take it.
I mean, look, I think Philly is the most consistent team in the NFL this year, right? So it's hard to go against a team that's played that consistently. So I would say, look, you're looking at a 31-21 victory. That's what I would say is, for the Eagles. I think if you're going to pick one team that can blow the other team out, Philadelphia has a much better chance at that. And again, I go back to that Tampa Super Bowl, the Tampa Bay, Brady, the one that Brady won for the Buccaneers, Tampa versus the Chiefs 2 years ago. And the thing that surprised me most in that game was Tampa's ability to impose their will in the first half of that game. And Philadelphia has the ability to impose their will. What limits me from saying absolutely that will happen, and what tells me that Kansas City has a much better chance this time around, is Kansas City's offense is healthy. They don't have, they're not damaged at offensive
They lost their tackles in that game. Yeah.
Right. Like they couldn't function on offense in that game, right? They just simply couldn't play in that game. They'll play. They're going to show up and play. And they're going to be, and they have, a quarterback, while he's a little bit damaged, he's the best quarterback on. You have the best quarterback on the field in a game like this, you got a serious chance, right? So if you tell me at the end of the day that Kansas City wins this game, I'm not surprised at all. Is it a closer game? Yeah. Is it something like 27-23? Yeah, that would be the game. That would be the score I would pick if under a scenario in which the Chiefs win, right? Like something happens, a mistake is made. Hurts can't really throw the ball that effectively. Like Hurts doesn't look like he's throwing the ball that well right now to me.
Now, he hasn't statistically in the playoffs, but I don't know if that's because they're blowing people out and they're just trying to get to the finish line in the second half, or
well, I mean, he just looks like there's not the same. I mean, just to the trained eye and not to anything that statistical analysis. Like I don't have a jugs gun or doing side by side comparison kind of stuff. It looks like his arm is damaged a little bit right now. Which is perfectly acceptable because he's telling us his shoulder is not 100%, right? It looks like it's affecting his throwing. Now he still made the throw to Devonta Smith, which was not a catch, is a great throw. Yeah. Okay. I mean, it's a really, really great throw. He put it in one place where he can complete it. Now it wasn't completed, but it was still a great throw, right?
Yeah.
So there's still that there. I mean, he can function at quarterback. It just doesn't look like he's functioning the way he did in the first half of the season or first 3 quarters of the season, as it were. So you kind of put all of that together and go, okay, I can see a scenario where Kansas City wins this game. I don't see a scenario where Kansas City blows them out. I can see a scenario where the Eagles can blow out the Chiefs, because I don't think the Chiefs' defense is particularly great. It's good enough with Chris Jones to make enough plays, but it's not what the 49ers defense is the real deal, in modern football.
Smart minds think alike. John has said that a couple of times leading up to the game. If there's going to be a blowout, it'll be the Eagles on the blowout winning end. So maybe I should pay attention to 2 smart football guys like McMullen and Cole. Jason, always a pleasure. Appreciate you jumping in with us today. Enjoy your week build up to the Super Bowl, and then enjoy the game too. We'll be talking to you during the offseason.
All right. Be good, guys. Thanks.
Thanks, Jason.
Follow him on Twitter at JasonCole62. All right. Running late. We're coming back. We're going to put a bow on the show and get out of Dodge.